In America's richest cities, six-figure salaries now buy lifestyles that feel strangely fragile, almost unstable. You can earn more than doctors once did, and still lie awake at night, worrying about rent. The skyline glitters like a promise, but beneath it, the financial math has quietly turned hostile. Cities built to create opportunity are slowly becoming places ordinary workers can no longer realistically afford. Not because people stopped earning money, but because the cost of staying began outrunning reality itself. Every paycheck looks larger than ever before, yet feels weaker when it meets real-world expenses. This is the real cost of living crisis, reshaping urban America in slow motion, almost invisibly. And it is changing something fundamental: who gets to stay and who gets forced out. For decades, America's biggest cities sold a simple idea: higher wages, better opportunities, better life. Move to New York City, San Francisco, or Seattle, and your entire economic future could shift upward. Tech companies, banks, startups, all clustering together, creating explosive job growth and innovation. Economists described it as agglomeration, but in reality, it meant one thing: opportunity stacked in dense urban zones. The closer you lived to that stack, the faster your income was supposed to rise. For years, that promise worked, and millions of people moved in, chasing it. Salaries climbed steadily, just enough to justify high rent and long commutes. Then, something subtle started breaking. Housing prices decoupled from wages completely. At first, it looked like a temporary imbalance, just a hot market cycle. But cycles ended while prices kept climbing, turning into structure instead of accident. Housing in major cities began behaving less like shelter and more like a financial instrument. A home stopped being just a place to live and became a wealth storage system. Investors entered aggressively, treating apartments like stocks that could be rented out. When housing becomes an asset class, prices stop caring about local wages entirely. They start following capital flows, speculation, and global investment demand. That is where the system quietly begins to fracture. A software engineer earning $200,000 sounds financially unstoppable on paper, but that number exists before taxes, insurance, commuting, and hidden urban costs. Once deductions hit, the high income shrinks faster than most people expect. Then rent arrives, often $4,000 to $5,000 in major metro areas. Add childcare, which can rival a second rent payment in some cities. Add groceries, transport, healthcare premiums, and suddenly margins disappear. What looked like wealth becomes a carefully balanced survival equation. And the most disturbing part is how normal it starts to feel. Cities that once attracted talent now quietly filter who can remain. Teachers increasingly cannot afford to live near the schools they teach in. Nurses finish exhausting shifts only to drive hours back to cheaper suburbs. Police officers, firefighters, essential workers priced out of the neighborhoods they serve. Even high-income professionals delay homeownership indefinitely despite strong earnings. The economy is still generating wealth, but geography is deciding who accesses it. So the question becomes unavoidable: what actually broke? One major cause is decades of restricted housing construction in desirable cities. Zoning laws designed to preserve neighborhood character unintentionally froze supply. Height limits, density restrictions, and long approval processes slowed new housing dramatically. Meanwhile, populations and incomes continued expanding into those same cities. Demand rose steadily, but supply moved like it was stuck in time. Scarcity did what scarcity always does. It pushed prices upward relentlessly. And once prices rise, they rarely fall back to previous baselines. Then came another accelerant: historically low interest rates. Cheap credit allowed buyers to borrow far more than previous generations could access. That expanded buying power immediately translated into higher home prices. Sellers priced homes based on what buyers could borrow, not what incomes justified. The result was a feedback loop disguised as a normal housing boom. Then inflation entered the system and pressure increased again. The Federal Reserve System responded with rapid interest rate hikes to stabilize prices. But higher interest rates made mortgages dramatically more expensive almost overnight. Buying a home became harder, even as renting became the fallback option. Yet rental markets tightened at the same time, pushing rents even higher. People who delayed buying were trapped between expensive ownership and rising rent. Employers then faced a second-order effect, workers demanding higher wages just to survive. Companies increased salaries, but those costs didn't stay contained for long. They passed through to product prices, services, and subscriptions. Inflation became not just a macro trend, but a daily lived experience. The city transformed into a treadmill. Constant motion, no net progress. You can run faster every year and still end up in the same financial place. And this pressure doesn't stop at housing. It spreads everywhere. A simple meal becomes expensive because rent is embedded in every restaurant price. A grocery bill rises because logistics, fuel, and storage costs compound. Even everyday services begin absorbing urban cost inflation silently. Over time, people stop noticing the escalation because it happens gradually. What once felt shocking becomes normalized through repetition. That normalization is what makes the system so difficult to question. Because nothing looks broken on the surface, even while pressure builds underneath. Urban life increasingly selects for either very high income or inherited financial stability. The traditional middle class exists, but on thinner and thinner margins. One unexpected expense is enough to destabilize long-term plans. One job disruption can reset years of progress instantly. One rent adjustment can force a geographic and social reset. This is not collapse. It is exclusion through pricing. The city continues operating, but not for everyone who built it. Some residents respond logically. They leave before they are forced out. Places like Austin, Nashville, and Charlotte became pressure release valves for expensive metros. Remote work accelerated this shift, breaking the link between job and geography. Suddenly, income no longer required physical presence in expensive cities. If your work is digital, paying premium rent starts to look irrational. But migration creates its own pressure cycle. As people move in, prices in cheaper cities begin rising too. The affordability advantage slowly erodes everywhere it spreads. The system reproduces the same problem in new locations. This is how imbalance becomes national, not just local. Economists describe it as disequilibrium, a market stuck out of alignment. But for residents, it simply feels like constant financial strain. Not a crisis that arrives suddenly, but one that never fully ends. Cities risk becoming spaces where capital flows freely, but people cannot. Where investment thrives, but long-term residents steadily disappear. Where essential workers commute in from further and further away. Where community stability weakens under constant turnover. The skyline remains impressive, but the lived reality becomes thinner. America's economic engines are still powerful, still productive, still growing. But the deeper question remains unresolved beneath all that growth. If prosperity requires constant financial stress just to remain inside it, is it still prosperity? And if cities become unaffordable to the very people who sustain them, what exactly are they becoming?